We were never brave enough to do that early on because we worried about bandwidth, but I think we're all good. Welcome to our session. We just literally hit 12 p.m. So I will just start to slowly introduce our topic today, which is about influencing and leading others. And we're joined today by two wonderful Laureate Fellows, Alexandra Aikhenvald and Jolanda Jetten. And I'll introduce those guys to you a bit more formally later on. So I will begin to proceed. And now I've realised I can't go forward, even though I can. Oh, yes, I can. Well, so I will do the usual stuff that we do. If you've joined us regularly, I'll talk a little bit about small wins. And I will then spend about 25 minutes introducing some of the research on this topic. And then we will go to our laureates for their personal insights. And you are welcome to submit questions via Slido. Using the code there, #WinR, or via the chat. And we have Jess Gilbert, our postdoc, will be putting together some questions for the panel a little bit later on. Love it that we've got some cameras on, but if you can turn off your microphone, that helps. Any problems, just use the chat function. And I always encourage us women to stop for a moment and focus on ourselves during this session, something that we very rarely do, I suspect. But this is an opportunity to think about how we do things and reflect. So what we're really heading into now and this is our 9th Women in Research session, which is absolutely fantastic that we have so many women joining us. We've been talking a lot more about managing yourself and your career, but really what we're moving into talking a little bit more now about is mentoring and managing and leading other people. And that's really the focus of today. We're going to talk about influence and leadership. And I use those words very deliberately. I'm not talking about management or the sort of exercise of positional authority. I'm talking about leadership, and leadership is very often about influence. And leadership is something everyone can do. So leadership is not restricted to those people in positions of authority. Leadership is something we can all do. And so that's why I want to talk about leadership today and the importance of influence. So what I'm going to do is normally I would teach this topic through interactive workshop, but it's tricky to do that in this format. But I want you to imagine this scenario. Now, it's a bit of a contrived situation, I hope, for you, but I want you to just use it because what I want to share with you is some common strategies people use to influence other people. And then I want to share with you some of the research around which of those strategies are actually effective. So here's the scenario I want you to just imagine. Imagine that you're the person in the household who does all the washing, okay? And you're sick of it. You want your partner to do some more of the washing, and you've already asked and it's not happening. So how are you going to get your partner? What would you say to them to try to get them to do the washing? And feel free to share what you would do on the chat. So with that scenario in mind, I want to go through now. There's about 12 different strategies people use to get other people to do things. Okay, and as I'm going through them, I want you to just rate yourself on whether you use this tactic rarely or never. So that would be a 1. Yes, someone said, I just saw that nice comment, that it's not a hypothetical situation. So maybe you can, that person who wrote that, you can try some of these tactics out on your partner. So just rate yourself. And I'm not obviously here not thinking just about the washing, but if you're trying to get a colleague to do some team teaching with you, or if you're trying to influence somebody to change their PhD topic, or all these sorts of things that we do all the time, what strategies do you use to try and influence people? So just rate yourself as we go on how often you use these strategies. So the first one is pressure. This is pretty obvious. You know, one way you get people to do things is just demand that they do them, or pressure them, or, you know, threaten them to do them. So, you know, if we think of the washing scenario, this might be, you know, do the washing or else I am out of here, partner. So that would be an example of pressure. So do you use that tactic? Give yourself a score from 1 to 5. Sorry, there should be a 5 there for the very often. Next tactic, coalition. So here's another tactic that people use, and that's when you sort of, you know, gang up to try to influence someone. So you might mention the name of another person when you're trying to get somebody to support a proposal and say, well, you know, the dean likes my proposal. Or you might take someone along when you're trying to make a request, or you might get others to lobby on your behalf. So if we go to the washing scenario, you might say, well, my mother thinks that you should do the washing, okay? Or you might say, you might get the kids together and sit with the kids and your partner and say, we all think you should do more of the washing, okay? So that's coalition tactic. Legitimating is the next tactic, and this is when you sort of basically try to put some authority behind your request. So you might talk about how it's consistent with the rules or the policies, or it's contractually something someone's obliged to do, or you might refer to a policy or something. So in the world of washing, there probably isn't a policy, but you might say something like, well, I've checked with the Manual of Successful Relationships and it says that we should share the washing. Okay, so just to give you an example of how that tactic might work. Okay, here's some more. Personal appeals. So here, when you're trying to influence someone, it's more like, oh, can I ask you a favour? Or could you do something for me as my best buddy? It's more personally appealing to friendship or loyalty or something like that when you're trying to influence someone. So that would look like, you know, I have a favour, partner, can you please do the washing? The next strategy is exchange, and this again is pretty obvious. You know, you offer to do something in reciprocation. Partner, if you do the washing for the next year, I will do the cooking. That would be an exchange tactic. So do you use that frequently when you try to influence people? Ingratiation is another tactic that's pretty obvious. And this is when you really praise somebody and say how great they are before you preface your, you know, before you ask them for what you want to do. So you might say something like, you know, you are a really detailed, conscientious person, and I know that you'll do a really great job sorting out all the clothes, and you'll do a terrific job at the washing. So that would be an example of ingratiation. Okay, some of you are smiling, thinking that you might try this out tonight. Okay, apprising is when you frame your request in the context of how it could help that other person. So I want to ask you to write this book chapter because it's going to help you in your career. So it's sort of really trying to influence people because you think that they will benefit from it. So, you know, taking on the washing means that you will learn new skills that you could use in the future. Okay, next tactic. So now we move to inspirational appeal. And this is when you really are trying to influence someone about doing something that's, you know, and using tactics of inspiration. So something is really exciting and worthwhile, that's going to connect with values and ideals. So if we think of that from a washing perspective, and I realise I'm trivialising this a little bit, but that's deliberate because I want to just convey what the tactic is. You know, it's always been important to us in our relationship to have equity and to share. And so, you know, taking on the washing would make our roles more equal and would be really consistent with the type of relationship that we value. Okay, so you're really trying to connect to the shared values that you have. Collaborative support is when you, if you're trying to get someone to do something, you offer to help with that process. You might offer to provide resources or show the person how to do it or provide assistance. So I'm very happy to show you how to operate the washing machine. That sounds a little bit sarcastic, but obviously in the context of doing this, it wouldn't be. Consultation. So here it's more about influencing people by trying to get their buy-in and by actually getting their ideas on how they might solve or address the problem. So, you know, I've observed that I'm the one that's doing the washing every week or every day, in our house it is at least. I propose that we alternate weeks. You know, what do you think of that idea? Do you have another idea? So actually asking for people's input. And then the last tactic is rational persuasion. And this is when, as it sounds, when you use facts and logic to make a persuasive case and explain why what you're proposing would be a good thing. So very rational. You know, I've analysed our current allocation of domestic duties, and I've been doing the washing 70% of the time. If you do more of this washing, this will give me more time to do other important things for our family. So very rational and backed up by facts, okay? So what I'm going to do now, now that I've gone through each of those tactics, is I want to talk about what does the research show is the most effective. And this is what the research shows, okay? You can take that knowledge and do what you like with it, but this is what the research shows. So let's start with the first ones that I began with. So I'll start at the bottom there. So I'll start with pressure. And by the way, so when I say research, there's quite a few meta-analyses on this topic, which obviously are analyses of lots and lots of studies. So I will talk about what those meta-analyses show. You can see there's this column in the middle, effect on commitment, and there's a little thing saying EMs. That means effective managers. So some of these studies compare managers that are perceived to be effective by the people they manage, not their self-report, because all managers think they're effective, but do the people that they manage see them as effective? And then if you compare those effective managers with less effective managers, is there a difference in the strategies that they use? So let's go down to the bottom, actually. Now I'll work up. And so the colour coding here is red is like traffic light. So this means use this tactic with caution. Okay, and so pressure. It's not surprising, I'm sure, to you that using demands, threats, frequent checking or persistent reminders as a strategy for getting people to do things is not usually very effective. It's rarely used by effective managers, and it has a negative effect on peers. Now, this sort of thing is obviously appropriate in a crisis, or sometimes if you really have someone's best interest in mind and other tactics are just not working. So it's not to say you should never use pressure, but you should use it very cautiously because it is seen quite negatively. What you can see there in that gender column is some of these meta-analyses compare men and women. Actually, this tactic is used more by men, so that's sort of interesting. Coalition is in the red category. So that strategy, when I said, you know, my mum thinks you should do the washing, you know, on average, this is also not a great strategy. It's moderately negative effect on peers and is rarely used by effective managers. Again, if you're in crisis or when you've got people's best interests in mind, it might be a good strategy. Legitimating. So remember, that's the sort of thing where you say, you know, the policy says this or whatever. Again, not a great strategy to use, certainly not a great strategy to use frequently, but it can be okay when other forms have failed, or when you really need compliance. I mean, if it's a safety issue, for example, you know, you might, you know, legitimating is a completely legitimate strategy to use. You know, there's a safety issue at stake, so you need to comply with the safety processes. So now we move up into, so I'm sort of going from the bottom up here. If we move up now into the sort of orange coloured things, these are somewhat effective sometimes. So personal appeals. So that strategy of, oh, you know, would you do me a favour? Again, is not very often used by effective managers. It's best to be used when you know the people really well, and you like the person and they like you, and you've got that sort of relationship. Interestingly, the research shows that this is a more effective strategy for women, and I'll talk a little bit about that at the end, why some of these strategies in the research are more effective for women. Now, I'm not saying you should do this, just to be clear. I'm just explaining what the research says. Exchange, which is that, you know, if you do this for me, I'll do that for you. Again, not very often used by effective managers. And it's probably a good technique when what you're asking for really has no benefit to the other person, but it's going to cost them time and stress. And so, you know, it's sort of like a bit of a deal. Well, look, you help me out and I'll help you out later. Now we move into the more effective strategies. And again, I'll start from the bottom. So ingratiation, and this is when you're using praise or flattery, actually has a moderately positive effect on when peers rate your leadership. And it is valued by bosses. So your bosses are going to quite like this if when you talk to your boss and you're trying to influence your boss, you're using praise and flattery. It's obviously best to use this when you're sincere and genuine about what you're saying. If you're just, you know, blatantly lying, it's probably, you know, going to get you into trouble ultimately. But if you genuinely believe someone is fantastic at something, and you know, then this can be a quite effective strategy. Interestingly, again, the research shows it's more effective for women. Apprising, and remember, this is the one where you're talking about, you know, how doing the washing is going to give you great skills for your future. So where you're trying to frame your request in terms of how it will help the other person. This is not particularly negative or positive, a sort of small positive effect on peers. And it's probably the most useful when you really care about, when the person is very focused on their own needs, you know, then you framing it in terms of their own needs, you know, is more likely to help. And then in a sense, the next four are all strategies that have been shown to be positive. So inspirational appeal, thinking about the values or ideals of the person. So, you know, let's use an example of, a real example, not the washing example, but this is a real example which I've been involved in. You know, for example, trying to persuade the dean to launch a new program, okay, a new leadership development program. So in doing that, I might actually, and notice here I'm giving an example, I'm not the boss of the dean in this case. The dean is my boss, but I still want to influence my boss. I might actually, and I have to say, do this, appeal to the values of that dean. And I know, and I knew in this case, that the dean was really motivated to make the MBA program, you know, the best in Australia, and was really wanting to sort of be innovative in this space. So when I made my case to the dean, I was really appealing to those sorts of values to try and get the commitment for the proposal. And you can see that this has a strong positive effect on subordinates, so the people being led and peers. And it's the fourth most common tactic used by effective managers. It works when you know what that person cares about. If it's a stranger and you don't know what they care about, it's more risky because you might assume they care about certain things and you might get that wrong. Collaborative support, which you remember is about offering to help. So again, back to the Dean example, when I make this argument of we should have this new leadership development program because it's going to be innovative and appealing to values, also saying, and I'm offering to set this up and lead it and, get the funding and all that sort of thing. And again, this sort of strategy has a strong positive effect on subordinates and peers and is the third most common tactic used by effective managers. It's particularly good when people are really busy. So my example, the Dean is really busy. The Dean doesn't want another problem on their desk. So the more that I can say, oh, I'm going to help you, I'm going to come up with this great idea, but I'm also going to actually execute it, the more likely that I will get the buy-in that I want. Interestingly, this is more effective for women as well. Consultation. Again, this is like, what do you think of the idea? Getting that person's sense or buy-in. Again, very positive tactic and the second most common used by effective managers. Particularly important when you know that that person has got knowledge or expertise that could really help. So you're being genuine. You're asking for their ideas, their expertise from a genuine place. You're not just being manipulative. And then the top one is the rational persuasion. And this, as academics, is something we should be good at, right? Which is using logic and facts and evidence to show that what you're proposing is feasible and is going to be achievable. So again, in the Dean example, not just a sort of pie in the sky idea, but here's the cost breakdown. Here's how we would run it. Here's, showing that you've actually thought it through. Here's the analysis of what other MBA programs are doing around Australia to show that if we do this, it really will be innovative. So again, a very powerful tactic in terms of influence. And particularly important when you've got shared goals, when you share the objectives, because in a sense they want to be persuaded and you're then persuading them. So that is a little well through of the major influence tactics that have been investigated and linked to leadership. So remember, these ones that I am saying are more effective. This is on average in the research. So on average, you have a bunch of leaders, you go to the people they manage and you ask those people to rate them. You go to the peers of the leaders and you get the peers to rate them. And then you put all that data together and you figure out which leaders are more effective, and then you come up with these sorts of strategies. So I encourage you to, you did a little analysis right at the beginning of what ones that you tend to use. If you're tending to use these ones in the green, then that's great, but it might be, I've always found when I've run programs on this, and even myself, we tend to have our favorites that we use, and we tend to not necessarily use all of them. So if you're someone who's very good at rational persuasion, but perhaps a little bit less around inspirational appeal, so you're very good at being rational, but you're less good at really getting that emotional connection, maybe that's something you could try. Or vice versa, you might be a very emotional, passionate person, who's great at appealing to values, but lacking a little bit of that rational perspective. So I just encourage you to think, what do you tend to use? Are you using the full spectrum? And maybe there's a tactic there that you could try, just to broaden your skill set. So I'm going to end now. What I've argued is that leadership, and I mean leadership, not management. So I mean all of us are leaders of our peers, leaders of our students, leaders of ourselves. Leadership is about influence. Even if you're in positions of authority, you will often use these strategies rather than directly just telling someone to do it, because you want to get that buy-in and the commitment, and you get that if you use these strategies. So some tactics are more likely to be effective and to get that commitment than others. So I've encouraged you to think about what sort of influence tactics do you commonly use, and which of the green tactics are things that you might want to work on and develop. So that is a bit of a whirlwind tour through what I usually would do in about a 3-hour workshop. But I hope that it's been interesting to you, because actually what we would do if this was a workshop, I would get you to practice those strategies. We've got more material there on our Women in Research website about these tactics, so do feel free to consult those. And what I would like to do now is move to hearing from our ARC Laureate Fellows. And I can't remember who's going first, but I will introduce both. So Alexandra Aikhenvald is an ARC Laureate Fellow from Central Queensland University. She is interested and does research on gender, information sources and epistemology, and focusing on all sorts of languages of New Guinea and Amazonia, which actually sounds completely fascinating. I should have mentioned that she is a linguist. That was a critical piece of information that I missed. So we're delighted to have Alexandra. And then we also have Jolanda Jetten, who is from the University of Queensland, Professor of Social Psychology and ARC Laureate Fellow as well. And her research is concerned with topics like group processes, social identity, and intergroup relations. So absolutely delighted to have our wonderful women today. And I think Alexandra is going to go first. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we will go to you, Alexandra.
Thanks so much, Sharon. Your talk, your presentation was an example of all the good management tactics, and especially inspiration, appeal, and rational persuasion. So thanks so much for having me. One other point that I've been working on for many years now is the way people phrase commands and imperatives. So then I will quote you, if I may. Now, it is really a very fascinating series, so many thanks for involving me in it. Dealing with influencing and leadership in a broader meaning, not leadership in sort of managerial meaning, but a leadership, basically what in my view academia is about, to advance our disciplines and to advance knowledge and to make societies a better place. I'm sorry for being trivial, if I am. And also the word manager is also being used in a broader sense. A manager is not necessarily a sort of upward manager who orders people around applying the pressure technique, but it is a manager in terms of a leader in their disciplines. And also another thing is that my understanding is the purpose of this meeting is not sort of solving broad problems, but finding a solution for ourselves. So it's really probably important for us to have examples from our own lives. We will never be able to fix the system. Probably it's not what it is about. It's what we expect to do as individuals to achieve the goal that we have and that we want to share with those people who we want to somehow influence. Also, our other goal, again, forgive me if I sound trivial, it may not be trivial for some of our real kind of managers in administrative positions. We need to maintain our integrity intact and continue a contribution to this. Now, leadership disciplines. In my discipline is linguistics. I work close with anthropology, so it was great for me to see Margaret Jolly's picture on that display. And of course, we work with other people, educationalists, psychologists, and so on. Now, one thing that I was really quite amazed is the questions we got. I counted about over 30 questions. And what they really show is the worry people have about the, well, quoting from one of the questions, the uncertainty in the university sector and banker-style mentality and cynicism and mistrust of those in so-called leadership. Perhaps it's mistrust of those who have incredible urge for power and those who have a different approach to honesty, and also this dreadful disconnect between two classes of people in universities, the managerial, I mean, like real managers, highly paid administrative staff, and us academics. And I think the only answer to that question, how can we shift the dial? Personally, the only way is this inspirational appeal. So we need to trust in our scholarship and try and just talk to our colleagues and just advance our discipline as much as we can. And this is a situation that we're facing in what anthropologists, not us, we don't use such words, call neoliberal universities, managerism, and loss of integrity by some of the managers, and the disconnect between managers and academics, which may create an unhealthy atmosphere. So I was really amazed. I saw a question, how to manage a boss who is not honest. Of course, it depends how you define honesty, right? Or how they define honesty. It may define them differently. Or how to influence a very senior manager that is 2 levels above, who is critical to your career and has taken a set against you for reasons unknown. Again, all these questions are, for many of us, day to day, and especially for those in kind of junior positions. Let me tell you a real life story from my previous institution. When I first started, many people think linguist is someone who knows many languages. I sort of happen to know a couple, few, it's okay. And so they are just languages. So I brought with me an Australian Research Council on, it was the world through the prism of language, so genders, classifiers, and languages of the world. That high up manager, who is still there, rang me up and said, oh, well, you're advertising a position on that grant based on linguistics. Well, I need to bring in a particular fellow in environmental studies. He has a wife who wants to a career change. And she's working, said, what is she working on, Chris? She's working on, I don't know what, English literature. So there was a language and there was literature. So what was I supposed to do? You cannot say no. So you cannot apply a sort of anti-pressure tactic. Now, one thing you could do, and what I did, and it worked out, I suppose, saying, look, shifting the responsibility, which is probably another way of persuasion. So I had my immediate boss, and at that point, that institution had a rule that an academic couldn't chair a panel, so I couldn't chair the panel. I was the chief investigator, but someone else, director of that institute, had to chair the panel. I said, well, what do I do? The director of the institute said, look, I'll deal with it. And he dealt with it. He just said, well, we need to consider every applicant. That person may be wonderful in English literature. She is not focused on, I think she or he or they are not focused on the topic of the project. There is a better person in. So one way of doing it is sort of deflecting the things so that you do not really want to confront anyone. There are also other, but maybe it's not a sort of way of behaving in every single way, but it's one way for not just for early career researcher, for researcher, and especially women. Look, especially people like myself, immigrant women, who will forever be accused of being, well, I mean, I speak English with an accent. I didn't grow up with English. Forever it will be thrown in your face, but you sort of deflected, you kind of stand behind someone. On the other hand, your position is not behind, because by your publications and just by sort of the inspiration and by the rationality of what you do, plus with the help of the Australian Research Council, you manage to get things done. And this is the way you influence upward, and you also influence downwards, because there were some questions about PhD students. It was a fantastic question. What can I do when I've tried multiple times to influence a student and nothing changes? Well, I had a student who came up to me, well, there is some journal which is quite upmarket in our area, American Studies. I got a few papers published there and he didn't. Said, how come you published a paper there? International Journal of American Linguistics. Well, I sort of said, you know, I quoted this. And then I've been in the field for a long time. But frankly, next part of that question was, maybe some students never change. I think that was the case. So sometimes you give up and you can't, they don't change, it's fine. But you sort of try everything and be as persuasive and as appealing as you can, and then just move ahead. Now, my favorite question of all the questions was, can you recommend good female-centric inspirational people to follow? Other than all the speakers from that panel, especially Sharon, and of course Maggie Jolie, You know, I would recommend, of course, Susan Sontag. All of her stuff is fantastic. And maybe some anthropologists won't agree with me, but Margaret Mead, it just, no matter what people said about her research, well, people said various things, there was a force in this woman who just pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed. And I think she mostly applied pressure technique, but look where she is now. She's one of the major people. So even if we sort of fail at some point, and then we have to, you know, we give up, we try to give up, and then we die, I suppose, as everyone does. Our scholarship lives beyond us, and that's Margaret Mead for you and Susan Sontag. Anyway, thanks.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. I love, in a sense, how you're framing your approach around the broad goal of advancing the discipline. And that's really connecting with your values, you know. So I love how you're saying, you know, that Margaret Mead was pushed and pushed and pushed, but with that strong values base, you know, underpinning it. So I really like those thoughts. And your point about that, the person wanting to have their partner or whatever it was as the key person, you know, I think that strategy you used was almost a legitimation strategy, because in a sense you're sort of saying, well, we have to have a panel, you know, there's a process, there has to be a process. And that was a really important thing. And with things like personnel selection, there are legitimate processes and things like that. So I think those insights that you shared with us are really it really will, I think, be helpful to those women that pose the question, and indeed all of us. So thank you so much, and I'm very happy now to go to Jolanda. If you can unmute Jolanda, that would be fantastic.
Thank you for having me again, Sharon and team. Really love to be here again. And I was actually lined up to do another one for you, and so we rescheduled, and then I saw the title for today and I had to chuckle a little bit because I was being brought in as the expert. I'm thinking, well, if I only knew the answer to this question. But look, what I would like to do is maybe talk a little bit about the approach that we're taking towards leadership in our team, in our research team. And that is not so much me, but mostly my colleagues, Nick Steffens and Alex Haslam. And I'll also talk a little bit about the questions that were submitted. So I thought there were some really good ones, and I had a few thoughts around some of them. And I'll also have a few examples that I actually came across that I sort of think show good leadership. If I go for too long, then just interrupt me, please, right? Okay, so I think, I mean, if you look at the organizational literature, and Sharon will know this very well, the traditional approach to that is that leaders, that's really something about personality. It's all about being charismatic, being made of the right material. You know, you're a born leader or you're not. And typically also that's a male, that's a female, and not a female that we have in our heads. And even though in the literature that is no longer the dominant sort of view, it's very much in sort of the more sort of lay connotation of leadership. That's what it is. It is what Sharon was talking about, you know, you just have legitimate power and you then pressure people. You simply ask them to do something for you and they'll do it. So it's a bit of a command and control view of leadership. But as I said, luckily that's an old-fashioned view, no longer anything that anyone would promote in the literature or where there's no evidence for its effectiveness. So instead, what our approach has been very different, and I'll just outline it very briefly. Is one of the starting points is simply that you cannot be a true leader if you don't have any followers. So leadership then is all about connecting with others. And that is very much what I thought was interesting. All the strategies that Sharon was talking about that are effective are all about managing relationships with others, being respectful in your treatment of others, and connecting with them in important ways. And I guess our work in particular shows that if people do that, then people don't follow you and don't sort of do what you want them to do because you tell them to, but because they want to. It's not because they're afraid to be punished, but because they really sort of are on board with what you want to do. But of course, it's a big call. And so how do you do that then? How do you build that relationship? And what we're focusing on very much is on, building up teams where you have shared goals, and it is about our noses are going in the same direction. It's all about what we want to achieve, what is important to us, and therefore also what are appropriate behaviors in the group, right? What is it as a group that we actually find acceptable, and what kind of behaviors are things that we just don't condone in our midst. And I guess an important part of that is then that you basically redefine a leader as someone who is a member of the group, is just one of us. It's not about setting yourself apart and being different, but it is about being the best possible group member and leading by example, right? That involves listening, showing respect, don't elevating yourself above others, but just being part of it. And, I think in a way that sounds a bit strange, because actually a good leader then is the best possible follower, right, of the group. But I just want to give you a few examples, things that I still have in my mind as things that I've really sort of respected and really appreciated about the people that were my mentors, the leaders, my superiors that I worked with. One of them was simply, I had a PhD supervisor who treated me as an equal. If I was running studies in a lab, he would come down and he would really look at how is it going, right? He showed an interest. He wasn't afraid of moving from his office to actually to my space and engaging with me. Or even some of the studies we did ourselves together, it's always an issue of, he's the professor, I'm just a PhD student. Well, it's more about, okay, who's going to run this particular session? And he would run just as many sessions as I did. So that is actually, you can't get it any better as a PhD student. That means then that I'm so it's a team effort. We're working together, and that made it very sort of effective, and making me really want to work with this person. I want to give one other example. Is I think also it's leadership is not about elevating yourself above others. And just one example that I thought of, which I think is quite telling, is in our research group we have a kitchen. And of course, in the kitchen, there's always people who don't clean up the dishes, people who leave stuff in the fridge so that everything smells when you open the fridge. And it's always about who's going to clean the fridge. And one Monday, I remember we all came in and the fridge was super clean, no more sort of stuff in there that was old. And it wasn't clear who did it until we actually realized it was actually the most senior researcher in our group who'd come in over the weekend on a Saturday to clean the fridge. And he didn't make a big deal of it, but I think it's that type of things. Immediately you have the whole research group who just gives you a lot of respect for that if you don't elevate yourself. And I guess this is the big thing, right? And I have to admit that when I got promoted to full professorship, I didn't quite get that leadership is not about elevating yourself. It's actually about being one of the group. And I think that is often that, why do you do that? Why do you think that you need to be different from the group? Why is it about telling others what to do and looking very much like a leader and acting like it and dressing up and distinguishing yourself? I think, especially in the beginning for me, it was also a bit this idea of looking weak. It is about you think as a leader you need to look strong. You need to, again, sort of with that strange idea of what leaders are in the back of your mind. Or, if you admit that you just don't know anything, something, right? In a meeting, someone uses another acronym. I didn't dare to say, oh, well, what does that mean? Just by fear of looking stupid. It's a sign of insecurity. And I think now I'm trying to do the opposite. I'm trying to point out, sorry, actually, I have no idea what you're saying. I don't quite understand it. Can you explain it? Just for someone who has not the same background. And I think it's almost sort of daring to show your weakness is actually a sign of strength. And I think it is appreciated by others if you don't constantly trying to show that you're the top dog. So just if I have a few more minutes, is that, yeah, then 1 minute. Maybe I'll just point to one of the questions that I thought, yeah, so I thought, coming from what I just said, there was one question that intrigued me. So it is, how do you remain authentic and connected to your team, but also lead with confidence, which by definition means you're not one of them? And if you accept what I just said, then my response to that would be that you can only lead with confidence if you feel that the team sees you as one of them. So it isn't either I'm being confident or I'm being one of them. One is connected to the other, and it is being one of them that actually allows you to be confident, and therefore also to be influential and to be able to lead others, also in ways that you don't have to use pressure, but others are sort of following you or interested in what you want them to do and motivated to do that, because they feel part of the bigger sort of goal that you're striving towards. All right, I'll leave it at that. Thanks, Sharon.
Thank you so much, Jolanda, and I love that you've brought it back to the group and the importance of that fundamental human skill of connection, you know. And actually I did a Future of Work talk last night, and these human skills are what we're going to need more and more of in the future. So thank you so much. I'm just going to quickly share my screen because I have a question to ask everybody. So hopefully you can see that there. Before we go to Jess, who will ask some questions to the panel, one thing I'd like you to do today is to just identify one tip or idea that you've heard today, one thought that you've had, and I'd really like to encourage you, and this is consistent with the concept of small wins, to try and use that tip before the end of the week. But if you can, that's only 2 days away, so you have to really do it today or tomorrow. If you can share the tip that you intend to use or that's intrigued you or a thought that's crossed your mind on Slido, using the code there, Jess is going to then put all of the tips that come together and put those onto Facebook. So without further ado, so one thing you're going to do, or one idea that's intrigued you from today, and I'm going to now stop sharing my screen again, and I'm going to hand to Jess. So thank you very much, Jess.
Thanks so much, everyone. I've just popped the link to Slido in the chat again and put the event code, which is always just winner for us. So to kick off our Q&A, I thought what I would do is pose some questions to our panel as a total. And I will do the questions that have come through on the chat and on Slido first. So the first one is really about using these tactics to sort of have influence, but in a sort of more longevity or over time sort of sense. So the question reads, if, for example, consultation and collaborative support have been effective to initiate a project, but then engagement and support drops off, which tactics might be useful to keep motivation and engagement going to see the project through? Sharon, did you want to start? Maybe.
Sorry, I just unmute. Yeah, so you've got the project going, and then you need to keep it going. Look, I think that you probably potentially have to just revisit some of those strategies, but perhaps, you know, reminding people of why they got involved, connecting back to their shared values, the shared goals. You know, as Jolanda talked about, you know, recognizing the fact that the people that got on board, you did it because it was something you were all wanting to do, or were persuaded to do. So there's a shared goal there. So getting back in touch with that shared goal and having the conversations about how you're going to manage it moving forward, and that might take a bit of rational persuasion. It might take a bit of that inspirational sort of stuff again, but that to me would be the key, would be to just connect back to those the shared goal that you set up because people agreed to be part of it. I see that a lot with things where, you know, sometimes, and even as a leader, you get things going and then you think, oh, I'm sort of afraid to ask people. I know they're so busy, and you almost have to remind yourself, but hang on, they did agree to this. They do want to be part of this. So you have to sort of then have the confidence to go back to them and say, okay, now we've got to actually get going on it, guys. So that would be my suggestion, but love to hear the others' thoughts.
Yeah, can I just put in my 5 cents worth? I think in those instances, it's the sort of cohesion of the team with shared goals and reiteration of the shared goals that may really play a sort of substantive role. We had such instances in the Language and Culture Research Center that I've been leading for like 25 years, one way or another. And of course, inspirational appeal is always there, and rational persuasion is always there. And as Jolanda said really nicely, we are sort of showing that we are all in the same boat, that no one is sort of particularly better or anything, but then maybe inventing new, now this one probably will be ingratiating or uprising or something like that. Okay, right. We are sort of, you know, people are a bit tired, they don't really know what these shared goals are, people are dropping off. Think of something new, like, okay, let's have a workshop, an international workshop on this, and get people from all over the world, and look, you such and such will be a co-editor of the volume, no matter who actually does much of the work. So just all of a sudden, some interesting twist that people may not have been expecting. And also, you know, it's one part of being a leader, I guess, is to sort of make sure people don't think that the idea comes from the actual leader. The idea comes from the consensus. The idea comes from that. And so it's again a whole mixture of red and green and orange. And then it sometimes gets there. Sometimes, of course, it doesn't. So trial and error. Thank you.
So look, I agree with everything that's been said. Maybe the only thing to add to that, I think that sometimes, especially when you're in a team and you think actually things are not going, or we lost our enthusiasm, it's really not going as smooth as it should be, or there are a little bit of people are getting disengaged. I do think that it's always good to have an open discussion about those things. And it is really about either one-on-one or as a group, really like, look, I see that things are slipping. What's happening? Did we lose interest? It's really just being very explicit about what you're observing. And perhaps also sometimes, I think that was what Sharon is already talking about, goals change, right? And sometimes the best way to actually move forward on a project is to abandon it, really to realize, oh, actually, you know, is it not worth our effort anymore? Are people, you know, not interested in it, and, you know, and maybe we shouldn't pursue it. And I think as soon as you open up all of that, then people are also frank and open back. And sometimes that makes it a bit easier to manage those difficult situations.
Thanks so much, everyone. I think that's really important, Jolanda. Again, you know, from what you were saying before, and again now, having that human touch or that real social approach to things that can be really beneficial. Which kind of leads into another question that I wanted to ask, which is obviously quite relevant for, you know, women in research and the topic that we're looking at today. And the question reads, my leadership style is very caring, compassionate and inclusive. I feel that staff treat me as if I should not have the authority to lead them, and get the feeling that some people want to prove me wrong or prove that I am weak. How do I meet these staff in these situations? Who would like to start?
Oh, I'm happy to speak to that. I think it gets back to that issue what I started off with, that I still think we very often, quite wrongly, have the idea that leaders, that's a masculine style. And from everything that Sharon was talking about, and she will know the literature too, it's actually not true. It's actually, it is about consulting, about being open, about showing emotion, you know, listening. Those things that we typically associate with more female type of traits and behaviors that are much more effective so I don't want to pit it as, I'm not sure what the background is to this person's question really, but I think sometimes you get more done if you show your weaknesses, or if you actually sort of say, look, guys, I don't quite know what to do either. right? So can we just, and if you open it up and then it's actually you move forward much better than if you from the beginning are just acting as if you know it all, if you're so strong.
Alexandra, do you want to comment? I mean, I would just very briefly, echo what you've said there, Jolanda. Actually, those top 4 categories, you saw how they were more often used by women, but they're also the top strategies, right? So I think you're exactly right that we confuse leadership with dominance, and that's the stereotype. And as we've discussed in other women in research sessions, for women to engage in those behaviours, it tends to be a double negative because they are women, and women are not meant to operate that way. And I'm putting that in quotes deliberately. So, look, I think, though, in the end, that strength is fragility, and strength is humility. And the best leaders in the world, male and female, are able to be competent, but also open and humble and open to learning. So, look, I think it's not one or the other. And I think that's what you were saying, really, Jolanda. Alexandra, do you have a thought on that one?
Yes, of course. No, I totally agree. That's the whole point, is that one should not confuse leadership capacity with capacity to be domineering. And it's important to be able to show, to work together with people in one team. You have to show, yes, if you don't know something, you just say you don't know it. And okay, so what do you mean then? And that actually increases the respect others will have for you. So it's also part and parcel of the consensus. It's humility, not sort of pushing yourself forward, but also fairness to others. And not being sort of afraid that a crown will fall off your head if you give offer a coat to someone. That was an instance with a very senior Russian poet who did it, a very junior one, Tarkovsky, the father of the filmmaker you probably heard of, all of you, and cleaning the fridge when the most senior person, he just does everything. So we all share things. But then I think the essence of this question was that the asker is a bit lost because she feels that her techniques are not sufficient to make sure that she gets the recognition and the following that she really needs. So maybe then it's engaging other members of the group and talking to them and trying to see what may have gone wrong with the group. Because look, there are people at every level, every sort of sex or gender may have personality problems. So all this, I'm absolutely convinced that team effort may solve it. You just talk to people and you sort of just say, look, I feel there is something. So what is it? Maybe we could pinpoint it. Now, to what extent you do it face to face or you do it in some sort of more subtle way is, again, situational. So.
Thank you, Alexandra. Jess, do we have time to show any of or do you have any time to share any of the tips people have put on Slido?
Yeah, we've only had about 7 people write in so far. So I would especially really encourage everyone to jump over to Slido and put in maybe some tips that you might be taking away. Even if maybe you're worried about, I don't know, not having time to use them specifically this week, we would still like to know things that you're taking away with you.
So what are some of the ones that people have shared so far, Jess? Just a couple, just before I go back to wrap up.
I think there's been a lot of talk about, not being afraid to show your weakness and talking one-on-one to your team members more, and not being afraid to admit you don't know everything. And I suppose that really demonstrates the theme of, like being a human and leading as, from example, showing your vulnerability, as opposed to a more stereotypical masculine style leadership style.
Thank you so much, Jess. I'm just going to just wrap up with the final slides. We've had Jess. Just to remind everybody, if you have missed previous seminars, we've got all sorts of fantastic topics. Our last one was on writing. That was a very popular topic. So please go to our website for any of those. And I just would love to end our session today by thanking the Australian Research Council who funded this, and Curtin University as well. I really thank Jolanda and Alexandra, who not only actually very graciously participate in today's webinar, but actually have also previously participated in some of our Women in Research webinars. So special thank you to them. There's a lot of wonderful people who work behind the scenes. You see Sana, you see Jess, there's also Isabel in the background. And thank you to you guys. And finally, to all of you for coming, because it wouldn't be worth doing this if nobody was watching. So really appreciate your engagement, your chat, your turning up. Thank you for those of you who were showing your faces. It was absolutely wonderful to see you. And I wish everybody a lovely week, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, everyone. We're going to end the webinar now. I have put in the chat a reminder that if you're not already on our mailing list and you would like to be on our mailing list, send us an email. The address is ctwd@curtin.edu.au, or you can go to the Women in Research website and RSVP for future webinars. We will be sending out the slides in a follow-up email, and we look forward to seeing you at our private Facebook group, where you can continue the conversation with other women in research. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jolanda and Alexandra. I'll email you separately. So thank you, guys. Bye.
Bye.